Hey there, my name is Dan Sloan. I am otherwise known as Petrified Forest Pottery in the world of the internet. And I am in my basement studio in Portland, Oregon. And I'm going to share with you guys in this video some tools and techniques that I use around my studio to make things easier and to sell my pieces in the marketing side. We're going to talk about how to do things on a budget so you're not shelling out a whole bunch of money for a photo booth setup. We're going to talk about a budget photo booth setup that works really well and yields professional quality photos. I see lots and lots of questions online about what the options are as far as photo booths go, and there's a lot of ways you can spend a ton of money. I'm going to talk about how to do it on the cheap. We're going to talk about using a drill around the studio and some applications for a drill that make life a lot easier. We're going to talk about using diamond sanding discs to finish the bottom of your pieces if you have glaze drips or kiln shelf gets stuck to it. We're going to talk about diffusing screens, bulb choice, and backdrop for your photo booth. We're going to talk about selling online and shipping. There's a lot of different ways to obtain packing materials, and there are a couple ways to get them for free, which really cuts down on your cost and helps you get your work to your customers in a monetarily efficient way. We're also going to talk about craft fairs and booth setup, which craft fairs to choose, which ones are relevant to your work, and how I've set up my booth, what sort of materials I use, what sort of design I've used, and how I orient my pieces for the customers to see as they're walking by. We're also going to talk about Instagram marketing and how to keep your work visible on Instagram, which is a big thing, how to gain followers, and a couple other small tweaks you can make to your posts that will really make them more visible and relevant as far as the Instagram algorithm goes, and talk about the analytics that are available to you as a business account, which is free. So stick with me. We're gonna go through all the stuff. You're gonna have a great time, and hopefully you'll learn a lot of stuff that is relevant to you, whether you are a beginning ceramicist or you are an aspiring professional. Should be a lot of stuff for everybody in this video. So hang out with me and we'll get going. So transporting your work is a big deal. It's something I was really nervous about when I first started in this whole game. I started using bubble wrap, which I bought on eBay, which is expensive and also collects dust, which is not ideal. And it was recommended to me that I use newspaper. And at first I was really cautious about it and thought that it would probably result in several broken pieces per load. But in my experience, I've never broken anything when wrapped in newspaper. I use plastic storage tubs to transport my work, and I will have a layer of newspaper on the bottom, which is usually just old newsprint that I've used for wrapping previous loads of work. And I use this for transporting bone dry pieces to the kiln for bisque firing, as well as transporting glazed bisque work to the kiln for glazed firings. I always use 2 pieces of newsprint for a mug and 1 piece for small stuff like a teacup. And so like that, and then a second sheet. Then set it in the storage tub with the handle facing inwards. Like I've said, I've never broken a piece doing this. I've never damaged glaze doing this. And when I transport pieces to craft fairs, I just use 1 piece of newspaper because they're already pretty durable. The real issue that I had before I started wrapping pieces in craft fair transit was that they would just scratch each other, and they'd all have scratches on them. So to avoid that, I just use 1 piece of newspaper to keep the pieces from actually rubbing on each other. These are much better than cardboard boxes, which I used at first, and they're definitely worth the investment. You can get a big tub for about $9 at a big box store, and I have probably about 6 of these that I have for various reasons, for transporting bisque or transporting to craft fairs. Now, as far as craft fair setup goes, I have maybe you can see it with the edge of it, a 6 foot by 2.5 foot folding banquet table that I got on Amazon for I think $55 or $60. You can also get them at Home Depot. They're super handy. I use it for glazing and for waxing the bottoms of my bisque pieces. Unfortunately, I have to clean it all off before I fold it up and take it to a craft fair, but very useful table. I also have a tablecloth that fits it perfectly. It's about the same color as this table, sort of a canvas khaki beige color, and that covers the table really nicely. It looks very professional. It was about $13 on Amazon. And on the front of the table, or hanging from the top of the canopy, depending on if I'm inside or outside, I have a little banner that I had made online through, I think, Print Runner. I just designed this in Adobe Illustrator. Super quick, super easy, nothing fancy, just my name. And I use magnets, these very strong magnets, to tack it to the front of my table or to the top of the canopy. Initially, when I first started doing craft fairs, I built a shelving system that was bulky and effective, and it looked decent, but I could only fit 2 in my car along with all my work. So I needed to figure out something that would be svelte and modular. So I built this, and this is just pine 1x6s with some water-based clear coat, and I put hinges or latches on the bottom so they stay married together and immobile. As often at street fairs, you're on the side of the street and the street is graded away from the center, so your table often is sort of at an angle. I will usually bring the same newspaper that I use to wrap my work. I'll bring a fresh copy, tear it in half, and then fold it a bunch of times and use that as a shim under my table to keep my table perfectly level. The nice thing about this shelving system, other than it is compact and I can fit 4 of them in the space of 22 inches once they're put back together. Every 6 inches I have a shelf. So I have a shelf on the table, I have a shelf up here, another shelf 6 inches up, and then another shelf 6 inches up from that. Most of my pieces are going to be 6 inches or less, so that works out nicely, and they don't occlude each other. I always set my work up so that I have very different pieces in each row, so that there is I don't have a wall of asparagus mugs. I have different things on each shelf to break up the monotony. It's also easier for the viewers to pick out what they like and to sort of have everything organized for them. You don't want to have your display difficult for your customers to navigate and to pick out the pieces that they like. I am prone to cramming my stuff together to fit as many pieces on it at a time, but I think it's a lot better to have your pieces spaced out and then keep your extras under your table in your storage boxes. Different craft fairs have different price points for booth fees, and often the booth fee is relative to the number of people who are going to be walking by and attending the craft fair or street fair. I find that it's good to get a couple of street fairs or craft fairs under your belt just so you can work out the kinks and understand how to pack your car, how to pack your stuff up. Do some $30 craft fairs or even free craft fairs. You probably won't make too much money at those events, but once you get your setup fine-tuned, then you can go and spend $60 or $120 on a craft fair. I have found that the most important thing at street fairs specifically is being on a main street. Never be on a side street, because the viewership is cut down dramatically on a side street, and you make probably about half or less than half of the amount that you would make if you were on a main street, which is also important because half as many people, or fewer than half as many people, are actually going to be seeing your work. and oftentimes people are unable to buy your work at that event, but they see it and remember it and recognize you next time they see you, and they'll be glad to buy a piece the next time if they can't get one this time for whatever reason. I take payment with Square and cash, and Square is easy to set up. You can sign up for free and they send you a little Square reader, it plugs into your phone, works really well. I charge 3% for people to use credit cards, and I've never had anyone complain about that. People are very understanding that there's a convenience fee associated with using a credit card. I always bring an external battery for my phone. I have this battery that I bought online. It was about $20. It can charge an iPhone twice. Very useful to have, especially if you're at a craft fair for 9 hours and you are using your phone all day long. Really good to have one of these. Just make sure you bring a cable, because without the cable, it's useless. I also bring extra water, and it's really good to make acquaintance with your booth neighbors on either side, so that when you have to go to the bathroom, you have someone to watch your booth for you, and vice versa. It's also nice to have people there to lend a hand if anything crazy happens. This probably goes without saying, but being friendly and outgoing at craft fairs, even if it's not your style or it is a drain on you, if you're an introvert, kind of like I am, it is very tiring to greet every single person who comes to your booth, but it is really helpful. You're never going to sell a piece to someone who you don't greet, and you're never going to make a relationship or a connection with someone who you don't greet. It's not that hard to do it. Just be friendly, to say, hey, how's it going? Feel free to pick anything up. If you have any questions, let me know. And people are very receptive to that. I always bring 3 of these to a craft fair where I will have my 6-foot table, as they're 2 feet wide. So 2 feet times 3 is 6 feet. And if I'm doing a 10-foot booth, I will bring my 6-foot table and a 2.5-foot table by 2.5 foot that I will put on the end. That way I have 1.5 foot to get out on the side. You don't want to have 10 feet of table, because then you have no way of getting in and out of your booth. When I sell a piece to a customer, I will wrap it in white newsprint that I get on Amazon for $20 or so per 10 pounds. 10 pounds is about this thick, and they're pretty big sheets. I think they're 18 by 24. The reason I use pure newsprint instead of my free weeklies is because the weeklies are free. They don't connote value, and they would show the customer that I don't care enough to wrap the piece in something that has some perceived value. You can get fancy tissue paper at a craft store, but that is unnecessarily expensive, and unless you're catering to a very high rolling audience, there's really no need to do that. You can also get paper bags, which I've never done. I will just hand the piece to the person. Hopefully they have a bag, a backpack or a shoulder bag, or they're prepared to buy artwork at the craft fair that you're at, and they will have a bag specifically for the pieces that they buy, so you don't have to worry about that. It's also an unnecessary expense, as bags are probably about 50 cents to $1 per new paper bag. So wrap it up in white newsprint. Sometimes I'll tape it with packing tape, hand it to the customer. Always give them a business card if they don't have one. I always offer them a business card if nothing else, and they can decline it if they like. I've found that signing my work with a chop looks a lot more professional than using a needle tool to sign my name in the bottom in cursive. I used to do that for a long time, but I think the chop really looks a lot better. You can see it's got my name on it. And initially I sketched out a bunch of different designs in a notebook and actually made the chops, but I have stuck with this one because I think it looks the best. I actually just lost my original one, so I had to make a couple more, and you have to make it backwards. Most importantly, make it backwards, because when you stamp it, it's going to be the mirror image of this piece. So I made a couple. They're the same as the one I used here, and I use a needle tool to make the design in the chop, and I wait till the clay is not leather hard, but definitely harder than fresh clay, because if it's fresh, it's far too malleable and you just make a mushy design. This one, you can see it's not entirely perfect on the bottom, but when you actually stamp it in clay, it looks great. I also use a knife to shape the chop so that it is exactly the size that I want. For example, you can see this one has a little bit of a border around it. What I'm going to do once this is bisque fired, I'm going to sand down this edge right here so that the chop is just slightly bigger than the letters, so that it gives me the signature that I want. So it looks like this. I find that using a chop just looks so much more professional than using a needle tool to sign your bottom, or using iron oxide to sign your name with a brush in cursive, or however you want to do it. So I highly recommend doing this. If you look at really successful professional ceramicists who are contemporary, who are not classical ceramicists, you'll find that they almost exclusively use chops. Something to consider when making your chop is to make it something that is searchable. So not a symbol, but either your initials or your last name or the name of your pottery works. So Sloan is my last name. So if someone wants to search Sloan Ceramics, there's a good chance they'll find me on the internet in some capacity. After I have designed my chop and let it dry, I will bisque fire it. And I've never glazed fired a chop, but I find that bisque firing, it leaves the chop porous so that when you stamp your work, it is friendly to the leather hard clay and doesn't stick, because it absorbs some of the moisture and you can pull it off shortly after you stamp it. So oftentimes after doing a glaze firing, the bottom of the piece will have, if you're unlucky, a glaze drip, or it will have kiln wash stuck to the bottom, or if for some reason the bottom is not perfectly smooth and that's important to you. And a good way to take care of that is using a diamond sanding disc. I have two different grits. This is a 200 and I think this is a 120. I use the 120 for grinding off big drips like this one, but I'll use the 80 or the 200 to finish it, to smooth out the bottom, and it makes a really nice smooth surface. And that's the feel of a perfectly smooth bottom is really special. So I'll show you how to do that right now. We're going to start. I just have this bat on the wheel. This is and here I'll wet the bat. Turn the wheel on, don't I? Wet the bat. Stick this on here. It's not perfectly adhered, but it will definitely do the job. I usually wear shooting headphones when I do this because it's sort of a shrill sound, and I want to protect my hearing. It's not ear piercing as you'll hear, but it's definitely not a pleasant sound. So I will keep a wet sponge in one hand with the piece in the other. I will hold the piece very tightly because you don't want it to go flying off and hit the floor, which I've done before, and destroy the piece. So right now I'm focusing on just getting off this glaze drip. Oops. So let's start in the middle. Check it out. You can see it's being ground down nicely. That's more water. Getting pretty close. I don't want to go too much past the glaze drip and start sanding the clay with this disc. I want to use the other disc because it's much finer. So there we go, we've gone through. There's a little bit on the inside, but I'm probably not going to ever get rid of that. Go a little further and then switch to the other disc. Sometimes this edge of the glaze is kind of sharp, so I will often, on an angle, grind it down. Just enough to take out that edge. Okay, now I'm going to switch discs. Wipe it off and take a look. So if you don't apply force evenly, sometimes you'll have spots that don't get sanded down, and I can see this spot right here is not getting sanded. This side is perfectly smooth all the way around. And something else I want to be sure of is I don't sand so much that I sand off my chop, which is possible to do sometimes. So I'm going to focus on this area right now, just applying a little more pressure to this side. Getting there. Okay, that looks great. That looks nice and smooth. Hope you can see that. Nice and smooth. And yeah, it feels really good. Hopefully someone will appreciate this. So these are available on Amazon, but I think they're about $8 or $10. And I've had this one for probably about a year and a half, and it still works just fine. So it's a really nice thing to have. I've never used the diamond pads, but the thing I like about these a lot is that they can create a perfectly smooth plane on the bottom of your piece. Having a nice smooth bottom is really nice for your customers. It definitely feels better than a rough bottom, and I don't even sell stuff that has a rough bottom because it's going to scratch someone's table and they will then be mad at me. Something to consider when doing the sanding of the bottom of your pieces is that little bits of glaze fired clay and glaze will get into your clay catcher, and I will always clean this out and throw out this clay because I don't want any of that stuff getting into my reclaim bucket when I reclaim my clay. I want it to be as pure as possible. So here's my drill, and I use this for a couple different things in the studio. This is a Makita drill. It was about $100, including the battery, and it is extremely useful. I love it. It's my favorite drill ever. It's much nicer than the $40 drill I used to have. I use this Kemper Tools trimming tool to make slip. I will put fresh clay and water in a measuring cup such as this and put it on the highest setting and just stand here for about 5 minutes moving around until it's perfectly smooth and there are no lumps. And then I can use that slip for slip decorating, such as on this piece. It's very handy to have the slip made of the same clay that you're throwing with, so that when it fires you know exactly what to expect. I also use the drill for mixing glaze. I used to mix glaze with a whisk, and it works. It's a great forearm workout, but it is so much quicker to use this bit, which I bought at Georgie's for, I believe, $24, and I always mix on one. I never mix on two because two is too fast and often the glaze will go flying. So it's pretty slow, but it works. It's much faster than using this, and it's much easier as well. As far as glazing goes, I haven't used these tongs in a long time. They're sort of a holdover from high school ceramics class, and I realized that a much better way to glaze pieces such as a mug or a cup is to pour the glaze in and then spin it and pour it out. Let it dry a little bit, and I'll come out. I will dip the rim and then let it dry and set it down. Then once I'm ready to do the outside color, I'll take my gallon bucket of glaze, stir it up, put my hand inside, hold it from the inside, and then dip this way for however long is necessary, then pull out, let it drip off, wipe off the bottom with a sponge, and set it down to dry. When glazing bowls, I will pour the inside and then dump it out, making sure that the glaze coats the edge evenly. Then once that dries, to pour the outside. So the reason I pour my bowls on the outside is because I don't have buckets, glazed buckets that are big enough, and also the tongs leave marks, which I don't want. So I'll take a pint of Potter's Choice glaze, which I never ever use, and put it in a pie dish, put the bowl with the inside glazed on top of it. Then I will pour whatever glaze around as I go, making sure that it covers evenly, and then I'll use my finger to wipe the edge so that there are no drips and that the edge has a consistent coat of glaze on it. One of the most important things in making high quality work is consistency, and a great way to be consistent with your glazes is to have a glaze notebook and to make test tiles and denote what the results are, what each test tile is glazed with, and if you like it, if you don't like it, what issues it had. For example, some have pitting, some have crazing, some have crawling. It's important to know exactly what your glazes are going to do when you actually use them on one of your pieces or on all of your pieces. A really handy tool to have is a hydrometer, which measures the specific gravity of your glaze. If you're mixing your glazes from scratch, you probably already have one, but if you're using commercial glazes like I do, it's really handy to know what your glazes are going to do based on the specific gravity. I almost always end up diluting my glazes about a cup per fresh gallon, as they're often too thick to dip and will result in running off the pieces, especially with Laguna B-Mix, which is the clay body that I almost exclusively use now. After you sell your work online, you're going to have to ship it, obviously. And the way I ship, I use stamps.com, not Etsy, to ship my work. I use stamps.com because I can ship if I sell something on Instagram or if I ship anything else I want to ship. It's flexible, it's $20 a month, and it is much less expensive than going to the post office. The rates are the same as on Etsy, but like I said, it has more flexibility. It's important to have a postage scale. The postage scale that comes with stamps.com is a piece of junk. Don't even get it. Just spend $25 on Amazon and get a postage scale that can weigh up to 50 pounds or so. It's very durable, and I also use it down here to measure out clay, measure out handles for mugs, and I have a separate one upstairs in my office. I order on stamps.com, and you can also order through USPS.com boxes, and these are free. You can get about 10 or so per pack. You can order as many packs as you want, and they're really handy for shipping your work. You don't have to pay for them, which is nice because you don't have to pass on the cost of shipping supplies to your customers. This box is 7 by 7 by 6. It typically fits a mug really nicely. Occasionally I fit 2 pieces in here if they're small, but typically it's just 1 piece. This is $8 from Portland to the West Coast, and about $11 from Portland to Midwest and East Coast. Then I have flat rate medium boxes as well. These are bigger. I can typically fit 3 mugs in one of these, and this is about $12.80 shipped anywhere in the US, and it's free. I get packing material from a local speaker manufacturer in Portland. They have big garbage bags of really nice, dense wrapping foam that is totally free. They're glad for me to come pick it up. They don't have to deal with disposing of it, and that's another thing I don't have to spend money on to ship my work to my customers. Bubble wrap works fairly well, but it's expensive, and the packing material I get is far superior to bubble wrap, and it's free, most importantly. I print out all my labels with a laser printer. It's a very inexpensive Brother laser printer that I bought on Craigslist, but they sell new for about $65 on Amazon. I don't think I've ever had to replace the toner cartridge. It prints flawlessly. It's not like an inkjet printer that breaks every so often. You always have to replace the cartridge. These things last forever, and they're very inexpensive to operate. I also always include a thank you note in the box with the work. If I'm selling the customer 3 pieces, I'll include 3 business cards and a thank you note, so that in the event that the pieces are going to different people for gifts, they each get a card so they know who made the work, where they can find out more about the maker, and so they also know that it's a handmade good from a real person making real work, not some faceless internet entity. So you're probably on Instagram, and there are a few things that I've figured out you can do that make your posts more visible, which is important to gaining a bigger following and selling more work and communicating to the world how beautiful your pieces are. First thing you should do, if you haven't already done so, is change your Instagram, your Pottery Instagram account to a business account. That way you get access to analytics on the back end that tell you who's seeing your work, or who's seeing your posts, how many people like them, how many people follow you based on a specific post, how many people found you who are not following you, how many people follow you from hashtags. That's all really important information that will help you determine what kind of post to make and when. If people comment on your post, it is imperative that you comment back, even if it's just a thank you or a smiley face emoji, something that keeps a conversation happening about your work is very important as far as Instagram's algorithm. The more buzz and activity around a piece, or around a post, the higher it will go and the more visible it will be. It's important to choose hashtags on your posts that are relevant to the work you're making. I have a list of the hashtags that I use saved in my notes on my phone, and I will copy and paste them into Instagram every time I make a post. That way I don't have to type out every single hashtag over and over and over. It saves me a lot of time. And you can see the hashtags I've chosen if you go find me on Instagram at Petrified Forest Pottery. I've chosen some hashtags that are relevant and that I find work pretty well as far as bringing in new people into my audience to discover my work. If your work gets reposted by an aggregator account such as Paul Blaze, it's important to comment back on all of the comments on that post, because the more that post gets seen, the more you get seen, and chances are those people have more followers than you do. I know I don't have 150,000 followers, so if 150,000 people can see my work and all I have to do is comment back on the comments that are made on that post, that is super easy and helpful. Video posts are often more liked, more favorited, and more engaged with than still posts, still pictures. If I am looking at a video, I'm going to want to see what happens in the end. I am not just going to scroll right past it unless it's something that's totally irrelevant to my likes or offensive. So if I see a mug if I hold my phone in my hand, and you'll see on my Instagram I do this fairly often, and rotate the piece so that the viewer can see it from different angles, can see all the different facets of it, can get an idea of what it really looks like, get a close-up of the glaze. That is going to be viewed for as long as the video is going, whereas if I just take a picture of this mug, even in my fancy photo background, it's likely that the person will not look at it for 15 seconds or as long as the video is. So the longer you have someone engaged with your work, the more you have them, the more time you have with that person, and that's important for creating a following. It's also important to infuse your post with your personality, and you can do that by interviewing yourself, you can do it by talking about your work, you can do that by demoing your work, and that is very helpful to create some sort of connection with the person, so that, for example, when you listen to a podcast enough, you eventually will develop a relationship with the podcast host. It's like a podcast friendship, even though they don't know you, but you know them and you feel like you share something with them because you like what they're doing. Same thing with Instagram, same thing with your account. It's very helpful to ingratiate yourself to your viewers. So we're looking at my professional quality photo booth setup, and the most expensive part of this is the backdrop. This is a Flow-Tone backdrop. It was about $50 on Amazon. You can also buy it on B&H Photo. But everything else was very inexpensive. These are each about $5 at Goodwill. And I have a plywood table that I made, which I do a bunch of different stuff on. Something else that's important is the kind of bulb you use. I use 5000 K bulbs. That's the temperature of the bulb. It's daylight temperature. If you use soft white bulbs, you will get a very yellow picture, and it doesn't actually look accurate to your camera or to your eye. So once I've got 5000 K bulbs in my lamps, they're just compact fluorescent bulbs, they're nothing fancy. I put a diffuser screen that I tape onto the lamp. Now this is just a plastic or nylon screen, and the bulbs don't get too hot, so there's no fire issue with this. This screen, I believe, was about $13 online. You get a big screen. I just cut out little pieces and taped them on the lamps. This makes a much softer light and illuminates the piece really nicely. It also eliminates most of the shadows around the base of the piece. I really like this gradient backdrop because the piece really pops as it enters up into the gray, and it looks really nice, really professional. I used to have a white backdrop, which I used. You can see on my Instagram previously I had a white backdrop, and that worked okay, but this really makes the pieces pop a lot more, and I think they look a lot more professional. I used to place the pieces in my garden and take pictures that way, and they look nice, but it does not look professional. And this will make even a kind of crappy piece of ceramic work look much nicer than it actually is. Something that's important though when you're taking photos of your pieces is to not make them look too fancy, because if they look better than they really do based on your photo, you're going to have dissatisfied customers when they actually get the piece and it doesn't look that nice. I only do correction for temperature. I use my iPhone SE to take the pictures, and I just hold it up and take a picture of the piece. I will do 5 shots of each piece, one with the handle on the right side, kind of a 3/4. I never do it straight on the sideways. I always do it 3/4. Then I'll do the other side 3/4. Then I'll do a front facing shot and then a rear facing shot. And then maybe I'll do one more shot depending on the specific piece. The temperature correction is just to make it look exactly as it looks to my eye, as the iPhone camera doesn't show exactly how it looks when I look at it. Never increase contrast, never increase saturation, because then you'll have a piece that looks more brilliant than it really is, and you're not trying to fool anybody, you're just trying to depict honestly what your piece actually looks like. Something else that I do when taking photos is with my iPhone, I will zoom in a little bit, because the focal length of the camera, when it's all the way zoomed out, it has a slight fisheye effect on whatever you're photographing. So by zooming in a little bit on your piece, you can back up and get an accurate depiction of what your piece actually looks like with no fisheye warping. I used to use a DSLR camera to take my pictures, but I find that the iPhone SE is plenty good to communicate exactly how the piece looks to my customers and to represent it online, which is where it is primarily being seen, either on Instagram, my website, or when I apply for craft fairs. Here's the faraway shot, and then I go closer to where I'm actually going to be taking the picture, and that's how it looks. Then I'll zoom in just a tiny bit and back up a little bit, and then that's my picture. Something you can do is you can move the lights so that you get highlights or you can eliminate highlights depending on what you want. You can also eliminate shadows by illuminating behind the piece or next to the piece, and then just move your camera so you're not getting that light in the shot. I always take my pictures vertical as well instead of horizontal, as I'm doing right now. I find that I get a better shot, and having a vertical space gives the piece more depth, I suppose. I'm not exactly sure how to describe it, but try it yourself. Try horizontal shots and try vertical shots. See which ones you like better. Thank you so much for hanging out with me over this last little bit. I really hope this information is relevant to you guys and you're able to implement it in your ceramics practice and up your game just a little bit. If you want to see how this stuff works for me, you can find me at Petrified Forest Pottery on Instagram. I'm going to get some tea right now because it's cold down here, but I will see y'all in the future. Take care.